if that's what you want to do, that's one thing, but that's not the way that I want to do it. I've felt very lonely in my most successful moments just because they haven't been done on my own terms. And I'm slowly getting to that point of being authentic and doing it on my own terms.
Welcome to Ballers Brew, the world's hottest sports podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bromfield, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for another exciting episode. At Ballers Brew, we dive deep into the latest topics and trends in the sporting industry, offering diverse perspectives and thought-provoking discussions. Whether you're a passionate fan, a professional athlete, or simply a sports enthusiast, this is the place to be. Join me as we explore everything from game-changing strategies to behind-the-scenes stories, all aimed at elevating your understanding of the world of sports. This is Ballers Brew.
Today we have a special guest who embodies the true spirit of sport. As an individual whose journey through the world of athletics is as inspiring as it is remarkable. He's not just an athlete. He's a symbol of dedication, passion, and excellence in the sporting arena. I am genuinely thrilled to introduce our guest today, Zane Weir, a rising star in the world of shot put. Zane's remarkable journey in the world of athletics has been nothing short of spectacular. As a shot putter, he has achieved milestones that have earned him recognition and respect on the global stage, from representing Italy at the Olympic Games to clinching the gold at the European Athletics Indoor Championships. Zane's achievements speak volumes about his talent and dedication. His story is one that resonates with every sports enthusiast and aspiring athlete out there. A journey of dedication, hard work, and the pursuit of excellence. Zane, welcome to Ballers Brew.
Awesome, and Michael, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be on the show. I've listened to a few of your episodes, and so it's great to finally be a part of it.
It's awesome to have you on, and as I said earlier, off the cuff, super excited to be able to delve into this with you and to be able to ask you a few questions. And perhaps, as I mentioned in the introduction, a rising star in the world of shot puts. You've been making waves in the sporting arena with your exceptional performances and your inspiring journey. However, for our listeners who may not be acquainted with your story just yet, could you provide a brief overview of your background and how you've become involved in shot put at the elite level?
Yeah, so I'm a South African-born Italian shot putter. I was born and raised in South Africa, and at the age of 24, made the decision to head over to Italy. You know, in South Africa, sport's such a big part of our culture and our sort of society. And so I think, like many South Africans, you get introduced into sport when you're quite young. I played a lot of sport growing up, and shot put was one of those things that I did. My father was a very amateur shot putter, and so I think he had a bias towards the sport, and he introduced me to that quite early. And then I think from there, you know, playing so many different sports really develops your kind of athletic ability. And I think shot put never really became too important on my radar until I would say I was 17 years old. And basically, you know, always kind of dabbled with it, but was definitely focused more on rugby and the sports I think that are a lot more rewarded in South Africa. And so, rugby dominated my sort of later high school years. And then I made the decision to focus on shot put just because of the sort of self-mastery aspect of individual sports. And I really liked being in control of the factors that I could control, as opposed to, you know, in team sports, there's team dynamics, there's coaching, selection, criteria, etc., etc. I really enjoyed the fact that if I threw a certain distance, then no one can really deny you places on teams or your ability as an athlete, you know. So it's not whether you're in form or out of form. If you throw the distance, you can go through and represent. And I really like that. I like that sort of very clear mark on what it means to be successful in the sporting realm. So that's kind of what got me into the sport early on. And it's kind of shown me worlds within myself, I think, since then. And I'm looking forward to this opportunity to share, I suppose, some of the insights that I've had in this journey so far.
It gave me a little bit of like a flashback memory when you're obviously talking about your early introduction into the world of shot put. And I remember, small disclaimer for listeners, we attended the same primary school, same high school, and in primary school, when I think I was maybe grade 5 or grade 6, I remember you coming late afternoons to the field and you'd set up your measuring tape, and then I'd watch you like practicing your throws and like really working on it from an early age, and in sport they always say it's consistency that allows you to reach your milestones, and it's those 10,000 hours that you put in of dedication in order to get there. So yeah, I find it truly inspiring being able to have this conversation and to think back. It's really all like an all moment. So it's really, really cool. And as I touched on now, right? So throughout your athletic career, from your early days in Amanzimtoti to representing Italy at the Olympic Games, you've had a fairly unique journey shaped by your upbringing and heritage, as you've touched on now previously. Could you share some specific instances or influences that highlights how your background specifically has influenced your path as a shot putter?
Yeah, it's thanks for sharing that memory. I actually didn't realize you even you were there in those primary school days. I remember those days well. And it's so strange to think back to that before I answer your question. It's strange to think back to that because there was always, when I look back on it, there was an unusual pull towards that training. It's like I wasn't extremely talented or dominating on the international scene. So I always found it quite remarkable that for some reason there was something within either the sport or just training alone that allowed me to really be interested in that. And I've kind of always followed that feeling, without having even necessarily something to work for, something that I feels worthy of working towards. It's always been quite important for me to just keep going at it. And I think that's a feeling that's worth following, whether that be in sport or life in general. But yeah, to get to my sort of South African heritage and then moving over to represent Italy, my Italian grandfather was a very big part of my interest in sport. And growing up, during school holidays, my parents, we always were working and we always spent time with my grandparents. We'd get there before my parents' work at 6 a.m. and, there was always sport on the TV. Whenever we got there, my grandfather was up eating his oats in front of the TV and there was always sports. That's a very early memory of me for sport. And then, like I said, the South African context, sport has played such a big role in the development of our sort of the fabric of our society, from Nelson Mandela using the 95 World Cup to kind of integrate races and cultures, and our great weather all year round is really conducive to being outdoors and having a really healthy lifestyle and being active. So, I think all those factors kind of molded my interest in sport, how you're viewed in society, being a sports person in South Africa. And I think just the general kind of hardworking, humble mindset of many South Africans of, just getting out there, working hard and, seeing where that takes you. And I think that shifted my early work ethic. And then, it was a beautiful transition to the Italian side of things. It really helped me pay homage, I think, to the influence of my grandfather. And he's passed away, but it's still just, when I look back and think of my journey in wearing the Italian colors, it's so special to have had the success that I've had and be able to in many ways dedicate that to him. So I think, the beautiful integration and the mixing pot of cultures and races within South Africa has just given me so much ability to interact with, people of all countries. And it's a beautiful way to grow up and be so kind of involved in things outside of your kind of known tradition. And South Africa gave me a really good sort of starting block for that. And I think it's helped me in all my relationships with all the internationals that I now know and call friends.
I want to touch back on, just to maybe go to the start of your comment where you referred to the self-dedication that it takes within the early days of training in terms of needing to show up by yourself. When you have no coach, you have no one to necessarily provide you with technical critique or to help reassure you of, okay, this is how you may improve or not improve. But in those moments, do you ever find yourself, as a boxer may term it, shadowboxing? Do you ever feel when you're by yourself that you're competing with this other person. You're chasing a mark for that one day. That I'm going to call it the hypothetical if you foreseeing that day you win a goal. You foreseeing the day you break a world record mark.
Definitely. I think in my younger days, those an Olympic medal, I think all the external recognition were big motivating factors for me. I loved that I could walk out at that stage. The world record was 23.12 meters. I loved that I could mark that and put a kind of beacon on that distance and see that. And, I think I was still throwing 16 meters back in those days, potentially even less. But I loved that I could have such a tangible visual of the difference between where I would want to be and where I am. And the beautiful thing in that, that shot getting closer and closer, over the years. So I really loved that. But I think, my kind of training philosophy is evolving and has evolved drastically. I think, going from trying to make it into the international scene to then being there to then be performing and being competitive and then winning international events. I think you have a lot of experiences and emotional experiences that kind of change you significantly. And I've had that, and some of my most successful moments have not been the most enjoyable moments, and that's caused me to reflect a lot on those things. And I think now the medals are still motivating, but they're not motivating for medal's sake and for external recognition. It's the process of getting there. And it sounds very cliche, but it's like, I think the people that ultimately are the most successful are the people that do their discipline for the longest and enjoy it for the longest. And so that's the kind of, I'm moving towards the more, I would say, sort of philosophical ways of training, and letting obviously the success be a byproduct of those things. But for the longest time, I held the success at the forefront of my mind and trained so hard and pushed so many of my personal barriers to achieve these things. And then I got there and I realized nothing's actually changed. Of course, you've put the hours in, you've worked really hard, and you've done well by other people's standards, but you get there, nothing's really changed, So I think that's really forced me to have a look at myself and, the reasons as to why I train. And ultimately, I think it's leading to a more sustainable approach to sport for me, and something that I'm enjoying a lot more. It's very difficult as professional athletes. A lot of the time we have to tick boxes. We have to make sure we, do mobility work. We're doing the actual training, we're recovering, we're resting well, we're eating well, all these things that it becomes a ticking of the box. But, I'm slowly learning now that I think the quality in which we do those and the way that we show up with the stimulation and the excitement to do those things, and that flow state that people talk about, where you get in there and you enjoy it, and you show up in a way that is not just to tick the box, but you show up in a way that is like, you're there to enjoy it. You're there to experiment, to play, to develop your movement intelligence. All these sorts of things start playing into performance. And I definitely think I've shifted away from using medals and, I suppose, external or even sporting success as measurements of success for myself. And it's definitely becoming a journey of meaning and enjoyment.
I'm just taking away from what you said, and I think especially in your grassroots level sports, and if you look at like primary schools or maybe even high schools, a lot of the time, from my personal experiences and from what I've seen, there's this big factor on chasing excellence. There's that winning motive that coaches really try. Not all of them. I don't want to place a stereotype, but there's often a fact of, we need to win this game, or you need to win this competition. And I think at an early age, and that becomes embedded in us as athletes, and you forget to see the bigger picture of what you're trying to do as an athlete, specifically, as you beautifully touched on it, when you're looking at the sport in terms of the longevity in what you're trying to achieve. And I had a discussion with my coach 2 weeks ago, and I was very frustrated after the set that we had. And she quickly reminded me of the rule of thirds, and how it's not always going to go your way. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and sometimes just in the middle. It's like, eh. And her point was, you need to trust the process. And on that, you need to enjoy the process. And that's exactly what you said. You need to be able to come into the training environment, and whilst you're there, you're trying to break that glass ceiling and continuously push yourself to be the best that you can be. But if the end goal is a medal or perhaps a record, then you may lose sight within the process and become blurred up in what you actually could achieve. And at the end of the day, I think all athletes, specifically at your level, it's how can you achieve micro gains? What are we doing day in and day out to continuously better ourselves? And earlier you touched on it. You referred to that moment on the podium where you're standing there and you've got your flag around you, and it's so overwhelming. And I think it's a tendency of you've put in all this dedication and hard work, and it's now this realization of it's not a box that you've ticked off, but it's a milestone that's really invaluable to your career. And I'd like to maybe touch in on this, and if you're happy to speak about it, you passionately spoke about the strong bond that you shared with your Italian grandfather and how his sporting tales motivated you to represent Italy. Can you perhaps share some specific moments or stories that highlighted the impact that he had on your passion for sport?
Yeah, definitely. I just want to comment on that podium moment. I think the problem a lot of the time is that sportsmen get into sport to win, to excel, and sports, being a good sportsman person helps you on the social hierarchy, no doubt. But the problem is winning tends to be the measure of success. And while it can be a measure, it's not the only measure. And I think, when you stand on that podium super proud, if you've kind of got there on anyone else's terms but your own, it's a very unfulfilling moment. And so I think that's why authenticity is such an important part, because winning is only important when you've kind of done it in the way in which you want it to be done, because then it's a way of measuring your method. Whereas if you're on someone else's method and you've done really well, it's fulfilling because obviously you get the money and whatever, but you haven't done it on your own terms. And I think doing it on your own terms is the biggest satisfaction that any athlete can get. Of course, working with other people and taking things on board, and you've got to have a relationship with the people that you work with so that you're giving your input and you're not just this little robot that's doing as you're told. If that's what you want to do, that's one thing, but that's not the way that I want to do it. I've felt very lonely in my most successful moments just because they haven't been done on my own terms. And I'm slowly getting to that point of being authentic and doing it on my own terms with the help of the people that I trust. And that's been a very rewarding process, and more rewarding than I think any sporting performance could ever kind of lead to. But going back to my grandfather's memories of my grandfather. In primary school, we used to do this cross-country race that I used to hate. Being a little bit bigger than the average person, it was compulsory to run, and I think it was only 3 kilometers. It felt like 30, but I think it was only 3. And we lived really close to the school, and so every year he would wait on the corner of our house to support us as we ran past. And that's I love that, because it was never because I was any good. So it was definitely just a passion, I think, of his to be involved in the sport, and I think just to support his family. And I think that's something that's always stuck with me, is that it was never about winning. I think for him, it was just the fact that we were taking part, and the fact that he knew that we were there, his grandchildren, and he was there to support us. He was I think he sat out there for 3 or 4 hours because we did in different age groups, but when each of us ran past, he was there. And I think that's something that's still quite special to me.
As soon as you started speaking, I'm like, I know which race you're talking about.
The annual dreaded race.
I remember every year I was like, damn, do you really have to do this cross country? Like there's this anxiety that would build up for that like first count. I still remember, I think they had us going from like the first year you joined the school. And I still remember everyone lines up and you have no clue what's going on. And you're just like, oh, we're just standing in a line. And then everyone starts running and you're like, oh. moment to go.
Man, that big sprint up the hill in front of the school, and then it's just been out of breath 100 meters later. No, it's not my proudest moment. Thank God for shot puts.
Gave you a good athletic alternative.
There you go. Let's call it that.
Whoa. Hey, Ballers Nation. Quick break in the action. Thanks for tuning into Ballers Brew. If you dig our fresh take on sports, please rate, review, or share the podcast. It only takes a moment, but it makes a huge difference. Thanks for the support.
I think it's super special that, you know, you can share that memory with your grandfather, and that you have that as like, I want to call it, you know, it's a diamond memory. It's something that you always hold on to, and it's linked to the sport, which is really cool. And you know, we're talking now about transitioning from cross country. Earlier we spoke about how you were very much, I want to call it a well-rounded athlete in high school, respectively. You did rugby, and you also did athletics. But looking specifically into that transition phase that you referred to, where you know you switch sports and deciding to specialize in shot put, which, because it's such an art in terms of the technical finesse that it requires, can you describe some challenges you faced during this transition specifically?
I think, you know, the transition for me from, you know, very popular sport into, I suppose, a not so popular sport faced, I had a lot of criticism. Initially, when I wanted to make the transition, I was at school on a sports scholarship, and I wasn't allowed to. I had to continue with the other sports. I couldn't favor one sport. So that was one example, I suppose, of some of the kickback I got in wanting to pursue what I wanted to do. You know, it wasn't in alignment with some of the reasons as to why I was there. So I obviously had to do some of the other sports. But I think, you know, that's from an external perspective. But I think the most important ones are the internal ones. You know, I think a technical sport is exactly that, technical. But what makes it difficult is that your body doesn't always do what your brain tells it to. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things in a technical sport. You know, if you want to, I suppose, running and you know, there's certainly more technical events than other technical events, but there's a technical aspect to everything. But, you know, a sprint, for example, you know, you train really hard, you get in those starting blocks, and you just, you know, put your sort of the pedal to the metal and just go for it, you know. Whereas the technique, you know, a more technical event, in my perspective, from shot put, it's a lot, and I've never done sprinting at Olympic level, so I can't completely comment, but my idea of it. But, you know, shot put at Olympic level it's a very fine balance between speed, power, and rhythm. And, you know, if you kind of get any of those at the wrong timing, you can completely mess up. And it's not a difference in 2 or 3 centimeters. It's a difference in 3 or 4 meters. And I think the hardest thing comes from a technical sport is when you're working really hard, you're doing everything you can, and the harder you try, it tends to be the worse you end up doing. And then you start thinking to yourself, well, you know, what can I do differently? What am I doing wrong? How can I change this? And kind of going through those internal battles of persistence, consistency, and all those sorts of things. So I think that's been the most difficult thing for me, is the technical side of the sport, and things not going my way as quickly as I'd like them to, and not necessarily having a plan for them to change, but, you know, kind of, as you said earlier, you know, trusting the process of the people that I kind of have in my team. And, you know, sometimes you don't have to make a breakthrough at every session. Sometimes the breakthrough is just the showing up and the consistency. Because I think for me, as I've learned, consistency is far more important than intensity. And so I think if you can continually just show up, keep trying, and work through it, the body adjusts to that. There's beautiful forces at play when you commit yourself to a process. And that's true for anything, and specifically so for a technical sport.
Something that I could slightly resonate with in terms of sprinting, you refer to in shot puts, when you're trying too hard, when you're wanting to beat the ball or beat the shot put itself, that, you know, that margin isn't a few centimeters, but it's rather meters. And similarly, what I've started to understand more over the past few years within sprinting. And I mean, I'm just speaking from my perspective, I may be very wrong for those that are, real professional swimmers and, they're up there at the Olympics, that when you're on the blocks and we call it, you're trying to rip the water, you're trying to get through it so fast and you aren't relaxed in a sense, that's when you aren't performing. You need to be comfortable to move through it without trying to be too forceful. And if you're looking at physics and you're working with the quantity of H2O and how your body essentially needs to be able to flow through the water in a dynamic motion that will be the most efficient in terms of energy expenditure to output. You're trying to find that sweet balance between the two, which I think it's fair in any sport. It could perhaps be the same. I don't want to make an assumption about that. And something I thought that is very cool, maybe to jump forward a few years, we're talking about a high school transition, and you also touched on your experiences now in the Olympics. But if we were to go back to 2019, the year prior to what was meant to be the Olympics, before the pandemic spread across the whole of the world. And again, we're looking at that specificity behind that transition phase. Your journey as an athlete, specifically looking at 2019, moving from South Africa into Italy and making that decision to work with your coach, Paolo Dal Soglio. Please, if I pronounced wrong, please correct me.
Paolo Dal Soglio.
Paolo Dal Soglio.
Perfect. Yeah, really good.
How did this shift in training environments and coaching support your influence in performance and personal growth, specifically within that transition period?
I think environments are everything. In life, in sport, in relationships, environments are so important. They can be energy giving, they can be energy draining, and I think the start of my relationship with Paolo was pretty effortless, and it happened all quite easily. And I think that really fast tracked me into where I am now. I certainly wouldn't be the athlete I am without him, for many reasons. But I think his professional mindset. So he was a professional shot putter, and so I didn't have to make the mistakes for myself. He really has made them, and he was gracious enough to kind of, speak to me about these things. And we have a very honest, open line of communication, and I'm able to learn on that from that. And so I'm standing on the shoulders of him and his coaches and all the mistakes that they've made. And I think, obviously the team that you surround yourself with is very important, but being able to be in an environment that's very one-track minded, and that's got pros and cons. But for me at that point in my career was really important. We would train, and I was living at his house during the lockdown. So, we'd train. He has got a beautiful training sort of facility at his house. We'd eat lunch together. We'd talk about shot put. We'd train in the afternoon. We'd have dinner. We'd talk about shot put. We'd sleep, and we'd do it again the next day. So we were, shot put was at the forefront of our minds for that whole period. And I think, not to the point of it being exhausting, but from I was very curious to learn. He was very willing to share. And I think that's really important, because you start to then orientate your mindset towards one fixed goal, and everything else kind of around that starts working towards that goal with you. And so I think that was huge for me. He's a very generous man. He's a very knowledgeable, technical man. And I think, spending so much time with him, not at the field, but in his own home with his family, sharing meals with him and his family, you start to get to see a different side of a coach. And I think that really broke down a lot of barriers. And I think that fast tracked me to where I am now, and to, where I was at the end of 2020 when I met him. So yeah, I think, your environment's really important, and it's something that you should take a lot of care in arranging your environment, because there are a lot of controllable factors. in the creation of your own environment. So I think that's something that everyone that has the opportunity to do should do.
It's very cool that you're touching on that, specifically on the point of how your environment has a direct influence in terms of your trajectory to success. And I feel over this past year, it's definitely something that I can relate to, in the sense that within my own athletic environment within swimming, I was in perhaps a situation after nationals where I did a lot of self-reflecting, and it came down to you write down the list of what are the factors I can control, as you rightfully mentioned now, and what are the factors that I can't control, what are the factors that perhaps led me to perform at the level I did, and how do I move forward from this? What is the biggest change, or maybe it's the smallest change, that you can take in order to just place yourself into a better environment, or surround yourself by the people that can, give you that positive rub, in the sense that they're just going to uplift you in both your sport, but also your day to day, because, in trusting the process, you need, as we said, you need to enjoy it. And if you're not in a healthy environment, you can't enjoy it. It's impossible to. And if that environment is toxic, it's only going to pull you down. And that was something I found in my, I'm going to call it a window of opportunity. It was trying to surround yourself with the right people at the right time. And I think, perhaps for those that are listening, and I don't know how you perhaps felt, Zane, but I personally felt, I was like, this is a little bit scary, because, you've built relationships with other people. You've put so much trust in that process. And now it comes time to, I now need to make this change in my environment. But at the end of the day, it could work, or it might not work. But again, it comes back to that point of trust. It's like, how can I do what I want to do, and trying to find the balance between, okay, well, this is what I can control. And for me, that's what it came down to. Is, okay, I'm going to change my environment, and this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. And at the end of the day, if I control what I can, then it'll work out for the best.
I think I agree. I think not a lot of athletes. I'm only going to speak from my perspective. In the earlier days of my career, I used to outtrain doubt and anxiety and all these sorts of things. I was kind of combating actually giving myself the opportunity to feel and realize how I felt by just working really hard, because that's what I believed was the noble thing. That's what would get me results, etc., etc. But what this journey has kind of shown me is that in spending more time, sitting in silence and reflecting on your own thoughts and allowing yourself to actually feel your body, you're always, once you learn to kind of understand how your body works and how you feel and how you respond to stressful situations, etc., your body is always giving you stimulus. It's always giving you things to make decisions based off of. And I think for young sports people, I think your mentality and your relationship with yourself is one of the most important things for sporting success. And I speak that from experience, because when you understand yourself, it's easier to make decisions that are in your favor. And I think when you're always moving towards things that your body and your mind is revealing to yourself, you're always moving towards the area that you're supposed to be moving towards. You might be feeling, I don't really feel respected in this training group. You're not being taken seriously. Make the decision to change. You don't, just because you've had a bit of success there, again, what is your definition of success? Is it medals, or is it being an environment that you enjoy that, is going to help you get, better results? People underestimate a stable mindset in high level sports. They really do. And I think, when you listen to yourself, when you understand how you respond to situations, you can make better decisions for yourself. And I really think you have to be open to knowing that the best thing for your sporting career might not be directly linked to sports training. You have to be open to that. And I wasn't. And it took me a long time to realize that sometimes sitting outside in the garden, watching butterflies fly between flowers was actually more important to me than getting another session and feeling tired and just pushing through pain. And it sounds so out there, but once you understand what's important to you, it's powerful, man. And it's a healthy mindset is at the end of the day the only thing that really matters when all else is equal.
It also comes down to, or from my perspective, is trying to find or fine tune the balance between those variables. Like you mentioned now, perhaps you don't, maybe you shouldn't go into that extra session when you absolutely flatline, but at times maybe you do. I don't know, maybe you disagree with me, but also there's those days where you need to push through that. And it's also, as you say, the taking that moment to sit back and reflect and allow your mental well-being to also be looked after, but not in the sense that you turn your mental stimulus off, but rather engage in activities that will enhance your mental stimulus in order to, when it's time to go and train, time to perform, that you're in a state that it's easier for you to get into that flow state and easier to fall into not this, I'd like to call it a monotonous routine of just not just showing up, but actually being conscious in what you're trying to do.
Definitely. I think, at a professional level, when you're training consistently and every day, it gets monotonous. And so stimulus is important. Different environments, different gyms, different throwing circles for me. All these things add a really nice mixture to an otherwise very rigid, monotonous type of lifestyle. So you've got to do what you can to get into environments that are stimulating. Who do you spend time with outside of those environments, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when you're talking about, pushing yourself and going to certain levels, I agree. I agree that sometimes those things need to happen and should happen, but you need to understand why they're happening. Are you pushing yourself because you're doubtful? Are you pushing yourself because you actually feel better than you thought you would, and your body feels like it needs you to click that extra gear and and put yourself into that place and see, okay, I feel really good today, let me go hard and see how my body responds, because that could happen in a competition and I know how to respond when I'm feeling this particular way. So I think intention is really important. But from my perspective, I was always trying to work super hard and be the hardest worker in the room, et cetera, et cetera. And those are lovely quotes and they sound great on motivational videos and, train insane or remain the same, blah, blah, blah. But, those are very, that's motivational. That's not a deep compulsion. And I think, compulsion comes from meaning and significance, and those are all individual, and you've got to understand what those are. Again, it comes back to that authenticity and trying to understand what it is for you that makes you click. And I think your first episode where you're talking about why, I really like that, and it's something that's been spoken about a lot. But it doesn't have to be as generic as I want to make my family proud, or I want to be considered really successful by other people, or whatever the case may be. When it comes from a deep conviction, that's really where sport becomes spiritual and influential. And I think that's where sportsmen and sportswomen are able to give back beyond an entertaining match or race. And I think that's really where the power of sport lies, and kind of, when it changes the individual, that's really where sport for me becomes interesting and enjoyable.
Just to touch on the last point you mentioned there, and I've spoken to a few people about this, and I think it's very hard in today's day and age where the sporting landscape, specifically, it was more noticeable post 2020, where sport became all about entertainment. It was that external relief for those who couldn't get outside, for them to see people being active, or for them to watch perhaps their favorite athlete, or to watch their favorite football team or basketball team, but to be able to engage in a sense that, oh, okay, this is the ongoing world that we're in. And it allows, for some, it's that moments to clear their minds. But on the flip side of the coin, when you try and understand the perception of the athletes who are being viewed as, these, for some to call it an entertainment symbol, or you're more than that. You're a human being and you're an athlete, and it's also important, as you said, when it comes to that, understanding the spiritual factor in terms of how sport plays a significant role to the athlete themselves, and how through their engagement with the sport that they love, it can take you beyond where your wildest dreams could have even imagined. And maybe a good point to segue on that is looking into another transition phase within your athletic career, specifically recently winning the gold at the European Athletic Indoor Championships in Istanbul. As I touched on earlier, that moment standing on top of the podium, listening to the Italian anthem, reflecting on your journey. Can you describe perhaps the emotions and thoughts that were going through your mind in that moment?
Yeah, there wasn't much thought. There was a lot of feeling, but not much thought. But I remember specifically on that podium thinking a lot about my grandfather, who at that point had passed away as well. And I think in many ways I wished he could have been alive to witness that. At that point, I didn't actually know the lyrics to the Italian national anthem, and I've since learned them. But I think, being up there and being so moved by the very passionate national anthem of Italy, and it was a very sobering moment, because it in many ways was the highlight of my career up until that point. The last Italian shot putter that won that was my coach 25 years prior to that. It was the 100th medal for Italy in the European indoor circuit. And it was exactly 3 years after the day I landed in Italy for the first time. So there was a lot of weird stuff at play in that moment. And I think, I didn't have the mental capacity to be processing all those thoughts. And so I think that's why, on the podium, you can see I just had tears in my eyes and I was just like overwhelmed by a whole bunch of different feelings. But a lot of it was, I think, pride. I think for the first time in my career, I was actually proud of myself. And I think that for me was quite a turning point in the way that I was training and the way that I wanted to change my training.
Yeah, I can only imagine the rush of emotion. And I mean, I've seen some of the photos where you're on the podium. I think it's such a it's such a moment and special moment that you get to share with both yourself and your family and all your loved ones that are around you. And obviously the pride that they have for you, and as you mentioned, the moment you can take that in and be proud of everything you've sacrificed up until that point to really be like, wow, okay, this makes it that little bit, not going to say that a little bit more worth it, but it's just that extra, that I don't know how to explain that feeling, but just that, okay, no, everything's working, everything's coming through. And I'd also just like to share my condolences for your grandparents, to you and your family. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been prior to actually the day of the competition or the day of finals, going in and having to mentally and physically compose yourself in order to perform at the level at which you did. And that's also really incredible. And earlier we touched on how, I can't remember the specific points you mentioned, but specifically looking at shot put, how it requires a unique combination of different factors. And what I wrote down, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I said it was physical strength, technical finesse, and mental resilience. Would that be correct?
I like that. That's quite a good synopsis. Yeah.
Okay. So how, in terms of training, how do you find a balance to continually trying to improve and reach new heights within your performances, having to consider those different factors?
For me, that's the most exciting part about training. I think is trying to find those areas of improvement. I think they're the obvious things, the things my coach gives me, the drills we do technically, the weightlifting stuff that we do, and then there's other less obvious things, like breath work that increases the the elasticity of your torso, and certain training methods, because there's obviously many ways to train, and that changes from America to East Europe to Southern Africa. There's so many ways to do it, and that's the beautiful creative part about it, is that you get to choose these things, and there's so many different ways to improve, and I'm really passionate about improvement. And so there's from consistency in sleep to really eating well, training hard, doing your little things on the side, like I said, your breath work, working on your mentality, and your forms of meditation, and there's a whole list of things that you can do. So I think for me, the interesting part in training comes from the experimentation, the creativity, and saying, I wonder how that will affect it. There's not a lot of areas in life now where you kind of have to commit to something for a 6-month period and wait and see how it turns out. Everything's very instant. And that can be a whole conversation within itself. But, sport is still one of those things, you can't cheat the system. There's your obvious ways of doing that, but doping and that has come in and eradicated most of that in our sport. But the feeling good, or feeling that long muscle, when you hit that technique perfectly and that ball feels like a kg in your hand, those feelings, those sensations are so beautiful, and that's ultimately what we're chasing. And so I think improvement comes in many ways. Sport's not one of those things you show up at 9, you leave at 5, and you can do whatever you want in your free time. It's one of those things that dominate your whole life, from the people you hang around with, to how many social gatherings you attend to, how much sleep you get, to the partner that you end up choosing. And that's exciting. It's exciting that your decisions can positively impact your life, and everyone's decisions do, but sport gives you such a measurable way to figure that out. And that's what I love about it.
I like how you mentioned within sports, you're continuously having to ensure that your daily routines are aligned with what you're trying to achieve in the moment and in the long term. Because as you said, it's very easy to get caught up in the now and think, oh wow, it would be nice to perhaps go out with your friends and enjoy a sociable evening, but perhaps tomorrow morning I need to be up at 5 or 7 because I have a gym session, or we're doing a throwing set. And it can very easily and very quickly deter you from what you're trying to achieve within the bigger picture. And you often need to, I can't speak for you, but perhaps there's those moments where you need to ground yourself again and go, like, this is what I'm actually working towards. This is what I'm trying to achieve. And a lot of the times what I've found is you lose a lot of people along the way who either don't share the vision that you share, or you are just on completely different paths of life, which isn't a problem. It isn't an issue. It's just, it sometimes makes that journey a lot lonelier if you don't have the correct support crew around you.
Definitely. I think, but for the people that you lose, maybe not in the same number that you gain, but in the quality, you definitely gain that. And I've found that personally. But going back to your point of, missing a social gathering or something like that, I think, as athletes, we have to be sensitive to what is actually going to be directly related to our performance. And I was kind of alluding to that earlier. But, an extra training session might not actually be the best thing for good performance, but doing something that makes the athlete feel good could potentially do that. Maybe not going out and getting drunk and having your body process all that sort of alcohol and poison, and and you show up, you're all tired, etc., etc. That might not be the best thing to do, but that doesn't mean going out with your friends and doing things that make you feel alive. Going to the beach, having a swim, or just doing something that makes the athlete, who is a human before a sports person, kind of feel that and remind themselves of that, because those are the little things that athletes often overlook, because they got to tick the box, they got to do the training. But I think you've always got to remain sensitive to what is actually best for the athletes, and that's never fixed. It's ever changing, and you've got to stay in conversation with yourself to attend to those things.
That is very true. And I've also found, so recently with my S&C coach, it's the often check-in conversation with both you and the coach, because sometimes perhaps, or for me, maybe still trying to understand the importance of, or trying to find that balance between giving that extra session of, going balls to the walls, and for them to go, you've had, 3 hard sessions, we call it dry land. You've had 3 hard sessions out of the pool. You're absolutely flatlining. Like, maybe take today off. Maybe just go do some foam rolling and stretching. Go for a walk. We like to. I don't think our coach really likes it, but I've heard some of the guys say, so post training we have to do our warm down, and there's a specific mileage that needs to be covered or recouped to ensure that we've had our flush of lactate. And I've heard guys often go, what if I just go home and go for like a long walk and enjoy the sunset, and I'll take my dog with me? And, it's like finding those alternatives to just allowing, as you say, getting away from that specific performance bubble, so to speak.
Definitely.
Something I wanted to touch on, and you spoke about it earlier, looking at your transition, moving to Italy specifically to work with your current coach. The pandemic posed numerous challenges for athletes worldwide, and you touched on how you adapted your training and allowing yourself to fully be submerged in the process of the ins and outs of shot put, and basically living the shot put life day in and out. But how did you specifically stay motivated during lockdown, considering the restrictions that were in place and the uncertainty behind, will I perhaps perform again, or will I have the chance to compete again, and will the Olympics continue if it is going to be 2020, 2021?
It comes back to each individual, obviously. But for me, I learned quite early on that you can't tie yourself to things that are out of your control. So, for example, competitions, the Olympics, this, that, the next thing. You kind of have to really root yourself in your training processes, and it's sometimes not always easy. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the short term for the long term. But I think, if I'm on holiday, I want to train. If I'm doing anything, I love the schedule of training. I love being able to move my body. I love, celebrating the ability of what I have. And so, whether that be core work, technical work, gym work, breath work, mental work, all those things are just so fascinating to me that if I had to retire from the sport yesterday, I would pretty much continue them in some way or other. So I think what I feel very fortunate about is that I've really been able to tie the things that I'm interested in very closely with my career, and that doesn't always happen, and it might not always be that way, but for the moment it is. And I think when you find something that's meaningful, you don't have to worry about being happy all the time or enjoying it all the time, because when something's meaningful, it really carries you through those peaks and troughs. Whereas if you're seeking sort of happiness all the time, when you're not feeling happy, it can be frustrating. You feel like you're failing. But if you're doing something meaningful, regardless of whether you're happy or sad, it's always going to be meaningful. And so I think closely linking your training with areas of meaning kind of makes it far more sustainable.
In a sense, would you say, because that kind of takes it back to the start of our conversation, where it's specifically looking at the process. You need to enjoy what you're doing. And as you said, if you were to stop yesterday, the process of what you're doing, you'd still continue that because you love the process, you enjoy what you're doing, and you're able to envelop that into your everyday part of your life.
Definitely. I mean, it's no secret, process is super important. And I actually, recently am becoming far more interested in my feelings around my daily work as opposed to the results that they impose. And I think if you can get that right, the results generally do take care of themselves. You've got to have goals, etc. But I think you got to make those goals more realistic, and you've got to be very specific with goals. You can't just say, I want to throw 23 meters. Because I can tell you, if you throw 23 meters and you're not in a good space mentally, it's really going to mean very little. So you've got to really understand what you want. So you've got to be honest with yourself. And sometimes it can be difficult to say, I'm in the sport and I'm actually not that concerned about winning a gold medal at the Olympics. But if I can kind of make a living, have beautiful relationships, train, stay healthy, meet interesting people, and travel, that's actually maybe more important to me than winning all these things and being thought to be the best ever. Can be maybe embarrassing to admit, but if that's what works for you, that's what's going to make you a great sports person and a great person to be around. And that's where you're going to create change. Everyone wants to be the best, but why doesn't everyone just be yourself? And that's something that I've kind of learned the hard way, and I'm kind of trying to move towards. I'm trying to be Zane Weir within sports. I'm not trying to be the best ever. And who knows what's a byproduct of being myself.
That's a very cool way to look at it. And it's trying to, you're not allowing the sport to be above you, but it's trying to allow yourself to be true to who you are, in the sense that through being me and through just having at it, let it take it to where it's going to take it. And we've spoken a lot about transition phases within your athletic career, starting from primary school, moving into the pandemic phase and thereafter, and your most recent competitions. Perhaps looking more into the future, what are your aspirations and goals in shot put and beyond? How do you plan to continue pushing the boundaries of your performance and perhaps inspiring others through your journey?
The beautiful quote by Rick Rubin, who's a music producer and I think an artist in many ways. He says, sometimes the best way to serve their audience is to forget they're there. And I think that's ultimately what I'm trying to do. I'm trying not to, assign myself to anything specific. I think I want to be selfish, and not in a malicious way, but I'm really trying to optimize training for who I am. And I realize that that's changing all the time, and so will the training. But I think I have very little. It doesn't really excite me to be remembered or to have my name in record books or any of that. Even the records that I have now, if you were to kind of wipe my name off of everything and no one really knew the history, that would not bother me one bit. I'm really focused on, I think, human relationships. People that I come into contact with, I always want that to be a meaningful exchange of energy. So that's really important to me. And for me, shot put is just a vehicle for, I think, developing myself into something that I think that I'm proud of, and also something that I think people can take inspiration from, not because of what I achieve, but because of who I am. And I think, if any action that I can do allows someone to be more confident in trying to be themselves, I think that's one of the biggest successes that I can have, because that's something that I've struggled with and something that I'm moving towards. And that's really exciting for me. And I think in shot put, it's great. It'd be lovely to say, I want to be the best ever. I want to throw 23, 24 meters, win a gold medal. And to be honest, those things do interest me, of course, but they don't interest me at the expense of the people that I love and the lifestyle that I enjoy. And so, I'm working. My biggest goal, I think, in shot put is to try to come up with a method that's sustainable for me, so that I can do it for as long as I can and enjoy it for that period.
Something I'm taking away, and I think it's very significant, is we're talking about enjoying the process, but now most importantly, when you're looking ahead, you don't want to lose yourself in the process. You want to be able to come in and day out, and as you said, being an athlete at a world level, an international level, it's also having that bit of selfishness as to you want to work on your craft, and it's about molding yourself to be the best version of you that you can be, and that's you as a person, that's beyond you as an athlete or a social figure perhaps, but just you as a person. How can you become the best you that you can be, which is a really cool way to look at it in terms of athletic performance and trying to find a balance between the other facets within the sporting realm.
Definitely. I mean, I think a lot of people forget, but we're humans first. And I think that's something that should be prioritized. Sport should accentuate the human experience in whatever way that happens. And I think you also have to remember that, you know, no matter what you achieve, you know, when you lie in bed that night to sleep, or if it's not that night, but the day after, because you're celebrating, the only person you are really with is yourself. And if you aren't at peace with that person, you know, that that money that you get, that medal you receive, the fame that you get, is going to be very shallow. And that's not to take away from those things. Those things can be beautiful, but they're beautiful when it's accompanied with a personality and a character that you're proud of.
Something I would like to segue into, and it's, you know, we're kind of touching on it now a little bit in terms of understanding your place within the world of athletics, but more importantly, your place in the world as a whole, and how you try and add value to those that are around you. As you continue to excel in the world of shot put and make your mark on the global stage, perhaps delving deeper into your journey and exploring the essence of your motivation, every athlete has a unique personal why, a driving force that fuels their passion and shapes their purpose. In the context of shot put, what inspires you on a deeper level and gives meaning to your pursuit of excellence in the sport? What is your why?
Expression. I think the freedom to express yourself in an authentic way is probably the most important thing a human being can have. And I think sport gives me the ability to express myself in a very physical and personal way. But it also gives me financial means to express the love I have for my family. It gives me the ability to secure a future for myself so that I can explore other means of expression, whether it be through art, through music, through a conversation with a stranger. Expression for me is the most important thing, and I will do pretty much anything to keep that option open. I think as soon as I stop being able to express myself in an authentic way, that's kind of when I feel the most trapped, and I don't enjoy feeling that way. So, in one word, expression.
That is very, very cool. Mine, that the first thing I think of in terms of expression and of what you said is you are able to truly and fully indulge into the uniqueness of your identity and to who you want to be. And through that, the byproduct of that is what you're able to or the relationships that you can instill with those that are around you, and how you can uplift other individuals that you perhaps meet along the way within your journey of trying to express who you are as a person, but also an athlete. And for me, looking at swimming, and it's something I've always said, it's like, for me, swimming is my first love. It's the one thing that truly makes me feel alive. And through my sports, it allows me to be who I want to be. And may not relate in this sense, but I love the feeling of being able to swim fast. And I love that rush that you get when you're doing what you love. And you're allowed to, you know, in that moment, perhaps you're a witty human being, or you're a humorous, or maybe you're a serious person, but that comes out in your sport, and you're allowed to truly engage with yourself as a being and express that with those that are around you, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about swimming fast without sort of psychoanalyzing it, I mean, that's an expression in so many ways of your ability, an expression of your hard work, an expression of your passion. And there's, being able to swim fast is such a gift. It's such a beautiful thing. So many people can't swim, never mind swim fast. And yeah, I think what a beautiful way to celebrate the miracle that is the human body.
As we come to the end of our conversation, I'd love to give you the opportunity to perhaps share any further advice or words of wisdom with our listeners who may be aspiring athletes or perhaps individuals who have faced setbacks or even felt overlooked in their own sporting pursuits. What message would you like to convey to those who are striving to reach their goals, overcome obstacles, and make their mark in the sporting world?
Sure. Save the best for last. I would say slow down. I think that's been some of the best advice I've been given. Develop a relationship with yourself, a healthy relationship with yourself. And I think I don't try and inspire people. Just try and be authentic, try and be kind. And I think authentic kindness is and always will be inspiring. And I think the fact, if you can move through life with that philosophy and you combine that with your dedication, your hard work, and all the things that go along with professional sport, I can't imagine you looking back at the end of your life and thinking, your career will be anything short of a success. So if I had to sum it up, it would be slow down, create a healthy relationship with yourself, and let authentic kindness guide you.
I really like that. The first thing that came to my mind, and pre-discussion, I did my dues, did some research, and there's a quote where you say patience, poise, and perfection.
And precision, I think. I think it was a. We must check my Instagram. I think it was patience, poise, and precision. But
Yeah.
perfection is good. I just think it's an illusion.
Then I apologize. European Athletics has misquoted you. Your Instagram.
Oh, sure, but no, but understood.
But yes, patience, precision, and poise. That is very cool. And I think it's definitely a takeaway point in terms of the way in which you approach the daily ongoings within your endeavors with wanting to excel. And perhaps you're not an athlete and this is outside of the sporting realm, and perhaps you're just a passionate sporting fan, but within the thing that makes you tick and it makes you want to get up in the morning, and it's the thing that drives you and that makes you feel alive. And if you're able to slow down and express yourself in a manner that is truly unique to you as an individual, you perhaps may exceed your expectations and find yourself within an environment that is truly blessed and unique to what you're trying to achieve, and set you up for longevity in a healthy and well-balanced life. But other than that, for now, I am going to conclude this episode. And for those that are listening and who have made it all the way to the end, I truly appreciate your time, and thank you so much for listening. As always, there are many more insightful and engaging episodes to come. But for now, that is it. I'm your host, Michael Bromfield. This is Ballers Brew, signing